For thousands of years, empires believed their power would last forever, until the moment history proved them wrong. Every empire in history believed it had escaped the fate that destroyed the civilizations before it. But beneath every powerful civilization was always a hidden system, and hidden systems can fail silently. Most collapses did not begin with invasion or war, they began with denial. And now, for the first time in human history, the entire world is connected to the same fragile machine. Every civilization begins by believing it has finally conquered history itself. Rome believed its empire would last forever. So did every civilization that came after it. But collapse rarely announces itself in the beginning. It starts quietly, almost invisibly. What destroys civilizations is often not a single catastrophe, but systems slowly failing underneath the illusion of order. By the time ordinary people notice the danger, the collapse is usually already underway. The bigger civilizations become, the more fragile their systems often grow. Modern civilization depends on systems so complex that most people never even see them. And history shows the same terrifying pattern again and again. Civilizations often appear strongest just before they fall, because the final stage of every empire is not weakness. It is the illusion that weakness no longer exists. At its height, Rome looked eternal, the center of the known world and the greatest civilization humanity had ever seen. Its armies controlled continents. Its currency dominated trade. Its infrastructure connected millions across vast distances. But beneath the grandeur, Rome was already beginning to rot from within. The empire became addicted to luxury, while the gap between the powerful and ordinary citizens grew dangerously wide. To sustain its enormous system, Rome slowly began weakening its own currency, sacrificing long-term stability for short-term survival. The empire had become too large to control, and every new conquest created another vulnerability. Like many civilizations after it, Rome continued projecting strength long after its foundations began collapsing. And when trust in leadership finally disappeared, the system began tearing itself apart from the inside. By the time external enemies arrived, Rome was already collapsing internally. Rome did not fall in a single day. It collapsed slowly, until one day the world realized. As empires grow richer, they often begin confusing temporary prosperity with permanent stability. Behind every powerful empire was usually a system of debt growing silently beneath the surface. Civilizations often spend the most on appearances precisely when they can least afford it. And as wealth concentrated into fewer hands, entire societies slowly became more fragile beneath the illusion of abundance. The more civilizations expanded, the more resources they needed simply to maintain the illusion of control. And this is where wealth became dangerous, because comfort blinded civilizations to the warning signs surrounding them. History shows that civilizations rarely collapse because they become poor. They collapse because their systems become unsustainably unequal. What once looked like unstoppable prosperity often becomes, in the end, every collapsing civilization experiences a moment when confidence suddenly begins to disappear. And when people stop trusting the systems around them, collapse accelerates faster than anyone expects. What begins as uncertainty quickly transforms into fear, and fear becomes contagious.
Empires often collapse, not when systems fail completely, but when people realize the leaders no longer control the situation.
The illusion of stability survives only as long as ordinary life continues uninterrupted. And once public trust collapses, order itself begins to feel fragile. By the time the powerful begin trying to escape, the system is usually already beyond saving. Because the day confidence disappears from a civilization, everything holding that civilization together begins disappearing with it. Some empires did not conquer the world through armies alone. They conquered it through trade, finance, and control of the global economy. Venice became powerful not because it was the largest empire, but because it controlled the flow of wealth itself.
Britain built an empire so vast that entire continents depended on its financial and industrial systems.
Over time, financial power became more important than military power, because controlling money meant controlling civilization itself. But every empire built on global dominance creates invisible dependencies that eventually become dangerous weaknesses. And this is where financial empires become fragile, because confidence is the only thing truly holding them together. When trade slows, entire civilizations begin suffocating without realizing it at first. The greatest economic powers in history often appeared strongest precisely when their systems were becoming most unsustainable.
Because every empire that controlled the global economy eventually discovered the same terrifying truth: financial dominance does not guarantee survival.
And today, for the first time in history, the entire world depends on one interconnected economic machine. One of history's most dangerous patterns is that civilizations often appear strongest immediately before they begin collapsing.
At the very moment systems become unsustainable, societies often become obsessed with projecting confidence. Because collapse rarely looks like collapse in the beginning, it looks like success.
The final expansion phase of empires often feels exciting, even visionary, while the foundations underneath begin weakening.
And this is where civilizations become most vulnerable, when leaders themselves begin believing their own illusion of stability.
History shows that societies approaching collapse often become increasingly distracted from the systems quietly failing around them.
The more advanced civilizations become, the more catastrophic even small failures can become. Empires rarely collapse because of one problem alone. They collapse when multiple hidden pressures begin converging at the same time. Most people never think about supply chains because they assume they will always exist. But beneath the surface, the systems feeding modern societies are far more fragile than they appear.
Entire economies depend on uninterrupted access to energy, transportation, and trade routes that can fail with terrifying speed. And when supply systems weaken, even the most advanced civilizations can begin unraveling within days.
The modern world has become dependent on systems so complex that almost nobody fully understands how all of them work together.
History repeatedly shows the same pattern. When trade collapses, civilizations begin starving long before they understand what is happening. And this is where modern civilization becomes uniquely vulnerable, because nearly every nation now depends on the same interconnected system.
The survival of entire societies often depends on millions of invisible workers holding fragile systems together behind the scenes.
Because when global trade begins failing, civilization itself can start collapsing far faster than anyone ever imagined.
Every civilization depends on one invisible force above all others: trust in its currency.
When Rome could no longer afford its empire, it began weakening its own money to delay the consequences. Throughout history, governments facing instability often turn to the same dangerous solution: creating more money to preserve the illusion of stability.
But when trust in money begins collapsing, societies themselves begin changing psychologically. What begins as inflation can quickly become something far more dangerous: a complete loss of confidence in the system itself. Modern financial systems are now so interconnected that fear can spread globally within seconds. And long before ordinary citizens recognize the danger, the powerful usually begin protecting themselves first.
Different civilizations used different currencies, but the collapse pattern always looked disturbingly similar.
Because money only has value as long as societies believe tomorrow will still function normally.
And if trust in the global financial system ever truly disappears, modern civilization may discover.
As civilizations begin weakening, they often become increasingly obsessed with distraction. Rome understood something dangerous. Populations are easier to control when they are entertained.
Today, distraction no longer arrives through arenas alone. It arrives through screens connected to billions of people simultaneously. And this is where entertainment becomes something more powerful, a tool for managing public attention itself.
Throughout history, collapsing civilizations often became consumed by internal conflict while larger dangers continued growing unnoticed.
The more unstable societies become, the more desperately they often seek comfort, distraction, and emotional escape.
What changed over time was not the existence of propaganda, but the scale and sophistication of its delivery systems. One of the final symptoms of declining civilizations is the inability to separate spectacle from reality.
And the more fragile systems become, the harder institutions often work to maintain the illusion that everything is still under control.
Because civilizations approaching collapse rarely run out of distractions, they run out of the ability to recognize what truly matters before it is too late.
As civilizations become more unstable, they often become more obsessed with control.
Throughout history, governments facing instability have always feared one thing above all else: disorder.
And the closer civilizations move toward crisis, the more aggressively they try to monitor the people inside them.
Modern surveillance no longer relies only on force, it relies on information. When societies begin fracturing, governments often expand power in the name of restoring stability. For the first time in history, civilizations are building systems capable of monitoring billions of people simultaneously.
And the most powerful systems of control are often the ones populations stop noticing entirely.
Empires approaching crisis frequently attempt to control not only actions, but perception itself. But history shows that surveillance alone has never been able to save collapsing systems from the pressures building underneath them.
Because the more civilizations fear losing control, the more dangerous their systems of control often become.
Long before civilizations physically collapse, they begin collapsing psychologically.
One of history's most dangerous patterns is that powerful societies rarely believe decline can happen to them.
As trust weakens, civilizations often become emotionally dependent on reassurance, even when reality is beginning to contradict it.
The powerful often mistake temporary insulation from crisis as proof that the system itself is still stable.
Declining civilizations frequently become obsessed with the idea of returning to an earlier golden age.
And when societies lose trust in each other, every crisis becomes harder to contain.
Many civilizations continue functioning long after people quietly stop believing in the future they are working toward.
Because fear can temporarily unite fractured societies, but it also accelerates instability over time.
The psychological decline of civilizations is often visible long before the physical collapse becomes impossible to ignore.
History leaves behind warning signs before every major collapse, but civilizations almost never recognize them in time. The first warnings are usually economic, because financial instability spreads silently long before societies physically break apart.
Another warning sign appears when civilizations stop investing in the systems that actually keep them alive.
History repeatedly shows that extreme inequality weakens civilizations from the inside, long before collapse becomes visible at the top.
When institutions lose credibility, every challenge facing a civilization becomes exponentially more dangerous.
Collapsing societies often become increasingly addicted to distraction because reality itself becomes psychologically difficult to confront.
Many empires attempt to project strength outward precisely when they are becoming weaker internally. Resource strain has appeared before nearly every major collapse in human history, even if societies refuse to acknowledge it.
Perhaps the most dangerous warning sign is when entire populations begin feeling anxiety without understanding its true source.
Because the warning signs before collapse are rarely hidden, civilizations simply convince themselves they still have more time. Cities are the physical expression of civilization itself, and they often reveal decline before the rest of society notices it. Even the greatest capitals in history eventually became mirrors, reflecting the instability spreading underneath their empires. As civilizations expand, their cities often become engines of wealth, but also pressure points where inequality and instability concentrate. The health of a civilization can often be measured by the emotional atmosphere inside its cities.
Modern cities survive only because countless invisible systems continue functioning simultaneously.
One of the clearest warning signs of civilizational decline is when cities begin losing their sense of purpose and vitality. History shows that cities approaching instability often become emotionally fragmented long before they physically collapse. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous, because civilizations often continue building symbols of prosperity while their foundations weaken underneath. Every great city in history eventually faked the same terrifying possibility, becoming a monument to a world that no longer exists.
Throughout history, the powerful always believed their wealth could protect them from collapse. Many ruling classes remained convinced the system would recover, even as the world around them was already beginning to fall apart. Long before ordinary populations recognize collapse, elites often begin quietly preparing for it.
But wealth can create dangerous psychological blindness, insulating the powerful from the reality consuming their societies. And this is where elites often make their final mistake, believing the crisis is still manageable after the system has already become unstable. History repeatedly shows that when elites finally begin trying to escape, they are usually already too late. Because no amount of money can fully isolate people from the collapse of the systems they depend on. The symbols of elite power often become some of the most haunting ruins left behind after civilizations fall.
What terrifies collapsing elites most is not losing wealth, but realizing the system that created their power may never recover. Because when civilizations truly begin collapsing, history shows that no one escapes the consequences forever. In collapsing civilizations, controlling information often becomes more important than controlling territory itself. Every empire in history understood the same dangerous truth. People who control the narrative can often control society itself.
But modern information warfare no longer depends on censorship alone. It depends on overwhelming with so much noise that
for the first time in history, civilizations are fighting wars inside the minds of billions of people simultaneously.
And the more unstable societies become, the more aggressively institutions attempt to shape perception instead of solving the deeper problems underneath.
What makes modern civilization uniquely vulnerable is that reality itself can now be engineered at planetary scale.
History shows that civilizations become easier to destabilize when populations no longer share the same understanding of reality.
And this is where information warfare becomes truly dangerous, because societies can begin collapsing psychologically before physical collapse even arrives.
When civilizations lose the ability to agree on what is true, every crisis becomes exponentially harder to survive.
Because in the modern age, the collapse of trust may become more catastrophic than the collapse of infrastructure itself. Civilizations rarely collapse because of one single failure. They collapse when multiple systems begin failing together. What makes modern civilization uniquely dangerous is that nearly every critical system now depends on every other system functioning perfectly. When energy systems fail, transportation, healthcare, finance, communication, and public order begin collapsing almost immediately afterward. Modern societies are so dependent on uninterrupted logistics that even short disruptions can trigger nationwide instability.
And this is the moment civilizations discover that complexity itself can become a fatal weakness.
Every civilization ultimately depends on ordinary people continuing to perform extraordinary responsibilities under impossible pressure.
And once enough systems fail together, maintaining social order becomes exponentially more difficult.
History shows that civilizations often survive individual disasters, but coordinated systemic collapse is something far more dangerous. Because when financial systems, energy grids, communication networks, and public trust collapse simultaneously,
while older empires struggle to preserve their dominance, new powers often rise quietly beneath the surface. History shows that declining civilizations rarely notice the moment new civilizations begin replacing them. The next global powers are not simply building stronger economies, they are building entirely new systems of civilization.
And this is where global power becomes increasingly invisible, hidden inside supply chains, technology networks, and resource control.
The emerging civilizations of the future may depend less on human labor and more on intelligent systems operating beyond public understanding.
As old systems weaken internally, rising powers often gain influence simply by appearing more stable and organized.
The empires of the future may not conquer territory first. They may conquer infrastructure itself.
And the more civilization depends on interconnected technology, the more power shifts toward those who control the networks behind it. History suggests that the next empire often begins rising long before the current one fully collapses.
Because civilizations do not disappear into emptiness, they are eventually replaced by systems powerful enough to shape the next age of human history. For most of history, civilizations were controlled by kings, governments, and institutions. Artificial intelligence is not simply another technological invention. It is becoming the infrastructure beneath civilization itself. Most people already depend on intelligent systems they never see, and often do not realize are shaping their decisions. Modern economies have become so technologically complex that humans themselves may no longer fully control them. And this is where artificial intelligence becomes dangerous, because systems designed to create order can also become systems of unprecedented control.
For the first time in history, civilizations may soon rely on machines to make decisions once reserved for human judgment. The most powerful empires of the future may not control land or armies first. They may control data.
And the more civilization depends on intelligent systems, the more catastrophic their failure or manipulation could eventually become.
Because humanity may soon enter the first era in history where civilizations are no longer governed entirely by...
Many civilizations throughout history did not collapse from war alone. They collapsed because the environment sustaining them began turning against them. Resource pressure has always shaped the rise and fall of civilizations. But modern civilization now faces these pressures at global scale. For the first time in history, billions of people depend on fragile resource systems vulnerable to environmental instability. And the more interconnected civilization becomes, the more environmental disruption in one region affects the entire global system. History shows that when food, water, and stability disappear, human migration accelerates faster than political systems can adapt. Environmental pressure rarely destroys civilizations instantly. It slowly amplifies every weakness already existing inside them. Modern civilization depends on the assumption that food, energy, and resources will continue flowing indefinitely. As environmental stress grows, competition for resources may become one of the defining forces shaping the future of civilization. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that many societies continue behaving normally, even while the systems around them become increasingly unstable.
Because civilizations may survive economic collapse, political conflict, and technological disruption.
If modern civilization ever collapses, it will not begin with one dramatic event, but with systems slowly. The first stage of collapse would likely begin inside the financial system, because modern civilization runs on confidence more than physical currency itself.
Once trade networks begin failing, even advanced societies can experience shortages within days.
Without stable energy, the infrastructure supporting modern life begins collapsing with terrifying speed. And this is where civilizations often become psychologically unstable, when governments begin prioritizing control over recovery. When people can no longer trust information itself, coordinated societal response becomes almost impossible. As pressure increases, millions would begin moving in search of safety, stability, and resources, placing even greater strain on already failing systems.
Modern civilization may reach a moment where intelligent systems continue operating more effectively than the governments meant to control them.
Collapse would not necessarily look like instant extinction. It could look like civilization slowly losing the ability to sustain its own complexity.
And if the systems holding modern civilization together ever begin failing simultaneously,
history does not repeat itself exactly, but civilizations often collapse through patterns that look disturbingly familiar.
Every civilization believed its challenges were unique, yet the warning signs before collapse remained remarkably consistent.
One of history's clearest lessons is that powerful societies almost never recognize decline while they are still capable of preventing it. As civilizations become more complex, they often become more fragile internally, even while appearing stronger externally.
History repeatedly shows that empires frequently exhaust themselves trying to maintain systems too large and expensive to sustain indefinitely.
What changes throughout history is not the existence of fragility, but the scale of the systems capable of failing. Many civilizations become consumed by internal distraction precisely when they most need collective clarity and long-term thinking. History also warns that civilizations ignore environmental pressure at their own peril, because nature eventually imposes limits every empire must confront.
And perhaps the most haunting lesson of all is that every fallen civilization once believed its systems were permanent. Because history may not simply be warning humanity about the collapse of past empires. For the first time in history, a civilization may be watching its own decline unfold in real time.
Unlike past civilizations, modern society possesses the ability to see many of the warning signs before collapse fully arrives.
And yet, awareness alone does not guarantee the ability to change direction.
The unsettling reality is that societies often continue functioning outwardly, long after critical systems begin weakening internally. As trust erodes between institutions and populations, civilizations become increasingly difficult to coordinate during moments of crisis. One of the clearest signs of civilizational stress is when populations begin losing confidence that the future will be better than the past.
And this is where modern civilization becomes psychologically trapped, aware of many dangers, yet unable to slow the systems creating them.
Perhaps the strangest part of decline is that societies often continue behaving normally, even while quietly recognizing the possibility of collapse. History reveals a terrifying pattern. Civilizations often appear most stable just before irreversible collapse begins.
The final illusion of stability is dangerous because it convinces societies that the systems supporting them no longer have limits. Collapse rarely begins during visible weakness. It often begins during moments of extreme confidence.
And the more advanced civilizations become, the easier it becomes to hide instability behind technological sophistication and economic spectacle.
One of the final stages before collapse is when institutions begin projecting certainty they no longer genuinely feel.
Complex civilizations can survive instability for long periods, until multiple hidden weaknesses begin failing at the same time. The illusion of stability often survives longest among those most insulated from the consequences of systemic decline.
And this is where civilizations become most vulnerable, when maintaining the appearance of stability becomes more important than confronting reality itself.
Because systems that appear permanent can unravel with shocking speed once public trust and infrastructure begin collapsing together. The most dangerous moment for any civilization may be the moment it finally believes collapse is no longer possible. When civilizations finally collapse, the silence left behind can feel more terrifying than the collapse itself.
History shows that while empires disappear, humanity itself continues searching for ways to survive and begin again.
For many civilizations, wealth did not become a symbol of strength. It became the beginning of their weakness.
The structures civilizations build to appear eternal often become the ruins future generations struggle to understand. The burden of sustaining empires almost always falls on the people with the least power to survive their collapse.
After large systems fail, survival often returns to something much older, local communities learning to function without the complexity they once depended on.
The terrifying truth about collapse is that it often happens psychologically before it happens physically.
One of the greatest tragedies of collapse is not simply the destruction of infrastructure, but the disappearance of knowledge, memory, and continuity itself. The closer civilizations move towards systemic failure, the harder they often try to convince themselves everything is still under control. History reminds us that nature does not depend on civilization. Civilization depends entirely on nature remaining stable enough to support it. Modern civilization survives because millions of invisible systems continue moving every single day. To those who come after collapse, even the most advanced societies may appear mysterious, distant, and strangely fragile. And perhaps the strangest possibility is that some of humanity's systems could outlive the civilization that created them. Collapse does not always mean extinction. Sometimes it simply marks the painful birth of a new civilization. Because after every empire falls, the same question always remains. What kind of civilization will rise from the ruins next? Every civilization throughout history eventually reached the same moment, the moment it believed collapse could never happen to it.
Human history may not simply be a story of progress. It may be a repeating cycle in civilization's struggle to escape. And perhaps the most haunting truth is that civilizations often collapse, while life still appears completely normal.
Modern civilization may be more advanced than any society before it, but it may also be more interconnected and fragile than anything humanity has ever created.
What makes civilizations powerful is often the same thing that eventually makes them vulnerable: complexity beyond human control. Throughout history, no amount of wealth, technology, or military power has permanently protected civilizations from decline.
Civilizations that survive longest are not always the strongest. They are often the ones capable of adapting before collapse becomes irreversible. And now humanity faces a question no civilization before us have ever confronted at planetary scale. Can a global civilization survive its own complexity? And in the end, the question every civilization ignores may be the same question history keeps asking humanity over and over again.